We're sorry, your call cannot be completed as dialed. Please check the number and dial again. This is a recording.
Indeed, today, in this video, why analog sounds better. You ready? Let's go. So I just realized that in all these years, I have never done a video dedicated to this controversial topic. In fact, I have a bulldog now, I have a cannon, several rifles here on my windows ready to defend myself because I know I'm going to be under attack. Because, as you know, clearly, that I do believe that analog media has a better sound than digital. And today we are going to explore through 5 main points why that is. So, let's go.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Okay, so our first point, I have to go through a little bit of technical aspects, and then afterwards at the end there's a little special take and you'll understand better why this title of this video. Now, point number 1, dynamic range. Now we know, at least the common knowledge says, because it's very difficult to properly measure dynamic range on vinyl. It is something different. There is a different perceived loudness also involved. In any case, usually it is described as around more or less 50-60 dB. It can go up to 75 dB in some cases, but that's rare. Although, in terms of capability, according, for example, Professor Keith Johnson, who, as we know, is a renowned engineer, according to him, you can go all the way to 120 dB. I'll put a link to his talk where he's mentioning this. A lot of people make fun of him about this statement, but I mean, he is who he is, so I tend to believe his work, his job. Okay, in any case, that's his point of view. I obviously have no idea if this is true or not. In any case, again, this type of media, if we're talking about vinyl, can reach a discrete amount of dynamic range. As for tape, actually current tape can go all the way to 80-90 dB, which is a lot if you consider that CDs reach 96 dB. Clearly, that's something more corresponding to modern era, contemporary era. In the old days, in the last century, we're more around 60-70 dB. Okay, so this is the theory, the specs, but that's not important. What important is what's on the medium, what's on the record, the tape, the vinyl, the CD, whatever it is. So if we take a look at current productions, and I would say mainly in the last 20-30 years, as we all know, there is this huge problem of the loudness war, especially present, but not only in digital media, where you have this brick wall type of sound wave, and when you digitalize it, when you see it on a screen, which means there is strong compression of the speaks, limitations, in order then to normalize and expand even more that signal to make it even more strong and louder, in order, as we all know, to compete on streaming with other types of media. It's clearly something that is greatly compromising sound quality. But we're going to go back to this in the end, in the 5th point. This is just to say that in most cases, especially in audiophile reissues, clearly not normal junky vinyl and tapes, but we're talking mainly about vinyl, more popular consumer type of media, we do have a softer type of presentation. We don't have that harshness due to the loudness, compression, limitation, etc., etc. There is loudness also on vinyl, but it's just different. Or at least I would say sometimes it just changes when it hits that analog type of media. It's not completely coming out from the converters when we're talking about digital. With analog, you have just a more euphonic type of reproduction. And that's why also in terms of dynamic range, I think vinyl is superior. Now, there is a famous dynamic range website. I'm sure a lot of you, I'm mentioning this because I'm sure a lot of you are going to mention this in the comments. That has not been correctly measured, okay? That's a different process. So don't use that as a reference, even though it's supporting what I'm saying. In any case, it is true that we have a more dynamic type of reproduction when you're using vinyl, especially quality done mastering, dedicated mastering for vinyl records. Let's proceed. Point number 2, frequency range, not response. That's connected, that's important, but we're mainly discussing about the extension, the different range of frequencies that can be found on these types of media. And vinyl has been demonstrated, you can find the link to the article, can go from around 5-7 hertz all the way up to 120 kilohertz. These are the limits, which are never going to be used, obviously, also because there are problems when you're going to cut in the dynamic range and also in the frequencies range. So these are never going to be employed, clearly. You must greatly reduce that. But nevertheless, there is a richness, there is a palette of frequencies much more present, much more expanded than, for example, a CD. Because there you have also an abrupt cut around usually 20, according to the Nyquist theory, 22 kilohertz. And when you see a sound wave coming from the any type of track, a digital track coming from that type of frequency range and resolution, you're always going to see at 22, the axe has cut perfectly the frequency range, the sound. All the frequencies are gone after that. While in vinyl, although you're trying to keep that, also because, as I always said, we have the limitations of microphones, clearly, so microphones don't go beyond 20 kilohertz. Very rarely they do, unless you're adopting a special type because you want to have a special type of ambience, reverberation, effects, etc. But that's not the norm. But you do have that coloration, you do have that nice open wide frequency range, which is going even more in that. Probably not that much in most cases because of the microphones, because of the mixing, the editing, because of the problems with cutting the lacquer, etc., etc. But it's a nice soft hill, okay? And that's, again, more euphonic. It's more pleasant, more acceptable from our ears and brain and body. So that's why also in this case, I think we have a better type of experience. Let's proceed. Point number 3, harmonic distortion. I actually did an entire video. Here is a link. You're also going to find the links in the video description. Based on this, where I questioned if harmonic distortion, already something that's called distortion, can be hi-fi. That was clearly a provocation, but yes, the answer, in my opinion, is yes, because when you are adopting a type of analog media, tape, vinyl mainly, there is this distortion, there's harmonic distortion that is just more pleasant and pleasing, euphonic, once again, to the ear. So that's why, another reason why we have this strong engagement, this strong attraction. And I'm very surprised that a lot of people claim abruptly, with no possibility to discuss, that digital is always superior. And in most cases, I'm sure those people are just looking at specs, because on the paper, it may seem so, especially with high res, where you have a lot of resolution, a lot of bits, a lot of samplings or DST and things like that. Sure. But please try also to listen to a high quality analog system. If you can't buy the whole thing, try to go to a fair, try to go to a friend, try to go to a hi-fi place. and experience that, because I'm afraid that a lot of people are just talking out of prejudice and expanding this fake knowledge. In fact, this brings us to our fourth point of engagement. I wanted to dedicate a point to engagement because simply the ears don't lie. As you know, I do not have a bias. I am filled with digital stuff. I have DSD, I have a streamer, I have hundreds of CDs, Blu-rays, DVD audios, HD CDs, XR CDs, anything you name it, I have it in digital because I like also that. Nevertheless, since I do have top-notch gear in both segments, it is clear that I would say 90% of times, not always, but 90% of times, the same recording is just better in vinyl, tape, analog. It's just more engaging. Let's proceed. Okay, for our last point, the digital disease, which I find very apt, very interesting. And it's a concept that was introduced recently in a very interesting video on 45 RPM channel by Michael Ludwig. Thank you for sharing that. Thank you for creating that. Let's see a little excerpt.
The thing about digital is if you go through too many processes, what I find is that everything starts to sound the same. In other words, there is something there that doesn't belong there, and it's on everything. It's like a disease. It's like looking at a photograph with reds and greens and blues, and you go through all this process of copying and doing all this stuff, and you come back out, and there's still reds and greens and blues there, but now it's all got this little yellow tint on it or something. You know, there's this other thing that's making everything lose some integrity. It doesn't, the stuff doesn't stand alone and speak the way only that instrument does. Everything has some kind of processing sound on it. And I just say everything sounds the same, especially if you use plugins and things like that. Now you're really looking at a lot of processing, and it's going to everything's going to have a certain sound to it, and the integrity is getting lost on each of the instruments.
Okay, so I was completely shocked, and at the same time, almost like a revelation when I heard Bernie Grundman describe digital from these point of view. Now, I just put a little piece starting from 1 hour and 18 minutes. There's a lot of stuff. Very interesting. I'll put the link here below of the video where he discusses about digital. And in fact, trying to summarize, I don't want to make this video too long. There are 3 aspects that he goes on, and just everything fell in place, just clicked. And I said, oh my God, that's true. That is what's happening. That's why I tend to go in the other direction, analog, instead of digital, even though in some cases I do like that. And what is that? Well, he insists a lot during the video on manipulation, changing the darn thing. Okay, so because if you did just a simple transfer, like DSD was intended to, like an archival format, just get it flat through there, don't touch it. Then maybe digital could say something more. It could be more engaging. Instead, unfortunately, there are a lot of reasons why digital has to be manipulated in the mixing. As we all said before, in the loudness war, they have to compress it, edit, EQ, plugins. There's so many things that change, and as Bernie was underlining, every time you do this, you completely change the sound. And not only you change it, you degrade it. The quality goes down, especially when DSD is involved, because I already said this in my DSD video. If you haven't seen it, here is a link. And as I said there, and I want to say it here since also Bernie said it, when you go back and forth, because you cannot edit DSD, so even in the MoFi situation, that's even getting worse and worse. You have to pass in PCM. You have to convert it to PCM in order to EQ it, in order to do the mixing, in order to do something on it, if necessary, and then convert it back to DSD. Even with normal PCM, a lot of times you have to convert it to analog to do different things, even just to sum the different channels. A lot of people do that because it's better, it's more euphonic. There's a summer, a piece of gear calls the summer, where you put all this in an analog dominion. But when you're creating an album, you go back and forth several times. You convert it several times. And every time you do that, there is a degradation. You're changing it. If Bernie also underlines, in fact, what's going on, for example, which we all know, in high-resolution music, which unfortunately, a lot of times it says 192 kilohertz or 96 kilohertz, 24 bits, etc., but a lot of times it's just digital quality, 44.1, 16 bits, upsampling. That's why it's important to have a certification of high-res, but that's another story. In any case, all these types of manipulation of the signal, digital signal, unfortunately kills the sound. And this does not take place in analog, or at least not that much. In digital, it is dramatic how you lower this. Just a simple example. If you record in 192 kilohertz, 24 bits, for example, it's almost impossible to keep that in the mixing phase unless you really just barely touch it. Then it's okay. Then you're probably going to have that. And at that point, since it is declared that type of resolution, and actually it was recorded in that resolution and sampling rate, they have to bring it up. And once again, another piece of degradation, another processing. It's very processed. And in fact, another point he greatly underlines is that besides these problems coming from manipulation, there's also great limitations inherent in digital, which I find very interesting. In fact, he was underlining that high frequencies, ambience, so these subtle tones, the low levels are very difficult to be reproduced by digital. That's the places in the signal where digital suffers. And when you do all this manipulation, you lose that. That's the first thing. In fact, he said very interesting. He said, a lot of people think it's more clear. It sounds better because it seems more clear because you took away stuff. So in the casual listening, maybe yes, you have that perception that it's nice and crystal clear and very clean. But that's not the case. I mean, you lost all the ambience, the reverberation, the little noises, and just the attack and decay, the microdynamics, the transients that characterize the timbre of instruments. Clear, you're not going to hear that in a hard rock album, okay? If we're talking about classical music and jazz, for example, or something a little more acoustic, you're going to hear that and you're going to lose that in a digital domain, unfortunately. So these aspects, I think, are very, very important. So as you have seen in that first little segment of video, that's why maybe you understood Bernie was talking about a digital disease. Because when you start doing this manipulation of the signal, everything starts to seem the same. And he said that 4 or 5 times. And I believe that I perfectly know, I understood immediately what he was talking about. Because that is true. Also, when I do the tests for you guys, that's why it's always difficult to do an A/B test with cables. Because every time I convert stuff, for example, so I have to process it with my sound card, then I listen to the 2 files and they're identical. Everything sounds identical. That's why he was talking about disease, because it's almost like something is passing in all the files as soon as you touch them, and they all appear the same. The characteristics appear the same. And as he was saying, as he was underlining, there is something that all of a sudden takes place in the digital file, which changes it, that does not belong to that sound wave. Maybe interpolation, maybe digital filtering, I don't know. But in any case, there is a manipulation, there is then a change in the sound, and at that point, the different characteristics are very similar. They're not different anymore in similar tracks, or even in general, in music in general. When we compare albums, pop albums, it's all sound the same. Obviously, it's also a composition issue. They're all very similar from an artistic point of view. But apart from that, we're talking from the sound signature, the recording process, mixing, editing, etc. And the results are very similar. And that's why it's happening. And thank you, Bernie Grundman, for explaining that, because it was something I was always sensing, but it was difficult to put in words. And he is a reference. I mean, if you don't know who Bernie Grundman is, please look him up. I mean, he is a master engineer. He's not a scientist. His experience absolutely brought him at that level. Experience does matter. Like Paul McGowan, he did not study all this stuff. He wasn't trained, as he always says. His own entire career and knowledge is based on experience. So that is something that I think it's worth everything and the most important part of the career of a person. So his experience is saying this, and I find it absolutely true. Okay, guys. Thank you for watching. Please leave your comments here below. Please don't hate me. Please don't be so harsh and too harsh with me. Please give me a chance. I think it's interesting. We can discuss this. No need to get angry. In any case, apart from all of this, remember that music is born analog.
Well, guys, if you're enjoying my videos and you're enjoying my channel, please consider to subscribe by clicking the black and white logo here below. Also, don't forget to click the notification bell so you'll never miss an episode and you will become a true member of the analog community.